Friends, a very good evening, and the topic which I am going to discuss is not a preaching topic. I want to discuss about a topic from biology, that is reproduction in plants, right? Whenever we talk about reproduction in plants, so first of all, we have to understand how many types of reproduction occurs in plants. See, first of all, there are two types of reproduction which occurs in plant. First of all is the asexual reproduction, and the second one is the sexual reproduction. So first of all, we have to understand what is asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is a reproduction where is just the involvement of only one parent cell without any fusion of gametes, and an offspring is produced. The offspring which is produced by a single parent cell in asexual reproduction is identical to the parent cell. Then is the sexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, both male and female sex cells are involved. Now see, male sex cells are known as sperms. Female sex cells are known as eggs or ova, which are produced from ovaries. When the fusion of these two sex cells or gametes takes place, an offspring is produced. In this condition, I am saying offspring. When I talk about plants, I will say zygote, right? But currently, we have to use the correct scientific word, that is offspring, right? A new offspring is produced which is not identical to either of the parent but has a mixed features of both the parents. So this makes sexual reproduction more superior than asexual reproduction, that it is having both the features, but the parent cell will always have the features of one parent cell only, not of both. Then we will discuss what about asexual reproduction. See friends, asexual reproduction basically takes place in lower forms of life. Lower forms of life, bacteria, fungi, yeast and all. So there are various types of asexual reproduction. The first type of asexual reproduction which I want to discuss is the binary fission. The word binary basically means two, right? So a single parent cell, first of all, it divides into two daughter cells. Those two daughter cells grows into an adult individual, which again divides. The examples of binary fission are bacteria and euglena. From the word binary, you can simply understand that the word binary means two. Now, multiple fission. Multiple fission is sometimes what happens that some organisms develop a thick protective wall around their body, which is known as the cyst wall. The cyst divides to form daughter cells. So when the cyst breaks up, the daughter cells grows into new organisms. Amma, those daughter cells which are produced when the cyst wall breaks up, they grows into individual organisms. Now, what happens in multiple fission is that a single parent cell divides into multiple daughter cells. From a single division of a parent cell, multiple daughter cells are produced. Some examples of multiple fission basically takes place in unicellular algae. For example, Corella and Chlamydomonas. And binary fission takes place in bacteria and Euglena. So in binary fission, single parent cell divides into two daughter cells which grows into an adult individual, then divides again. In multiple fission, a single cyst wall is there, cyst divides to form daughter cells, cyst broke up, those daughter cells grows into an adult into an individual organism. Now budding. What happens in budding? In budding, a small bulb-like growth appears on the body of an organism, which on maturity it develops into a new organism or being gets detached from the parent to lead an individual life. What does it mean? A bulb is there which appears on the body of an organism, and when it becomes mature, it gets separated from the parent so that it can lead its own individual life. Then I will now see that budding basically takes place in yeast, which is a fungi. Now, fragmentation. What happens in fragmentation? In fragmentation, the body of an organism gets broken up into small fragments. Each fragment develops into a new organism. It basically takes place in filamentous algae known as Pyogyra. Now I will talk about spore formation. Now some like bacteria, like fungi, yeast, rhizopus and bread molds. These are some of lower forms of organisms which grows through spore formation. Spores, what are spores? Spores are thin unicellular spherical bodies protected by a thick wall. Spores are basically being developed or being released from spore sacs. When the spores develops into a new organism or being released from the spore sac. Examples I have already told you like rhizopus and bread molds. Now I will come to vegetative propagation. See friends, there are some plants which do not directly emerge from the seed to the plant and then to a tree, right? They grow from vegetative parts such as leaves, stems and roots. So the reproduction of a plant through these vegetative parts is known as vegetative propagation. It is also an asexual reproduction because first of all no fusion of gametes takes place and no seed is formed. This is the special quality and to recognize the asexual reproduction. First point, no seed will be formed. Second point, no fusion of gametes will take place. Asexual reproduction is basically of two types, natural and artificial. Now see, natural if I talk about, so vegetative propagation basically takes place naturally. First of all, you can say by stem, no, not by stem. First of all, there are various categories like your tuber, rhizome, canna, and bulb, then by aerial stem, then by roots, and then by leaves, right? So first of all, I will talk about potato tuber. A tuber is basically a swollen, fleshy underground stem. Potato tuber has many eyes known as buds, which later grows into a new organism. Then rhizome. It is a short branched underground stem which consists of distinct and internodes buds, which later grows into a new plant. For example, some examples of your rhizome are, for example, your banana, ginger, and canna. Corn. It is a thickened round underground stem with swollen base leaves called scales. It has one or more buds which grows into a new organism. Example, gladius. Then bulb. Bulb is basically it is an underground stem which consists of a bud and membranous leaves called scales. It basically takes place in onion and lilies and all. Through aerial stem. In strawberry, for example, a slender branch is there which arises from the base of the stem. It bends and with the contact of the soil, roots and buds gets developed, which later grows that bud, it develops into plantlet, then it grows into a new organism. In some grasses and mint, or in some grasses and in mint also, the stem grows along the soil, forming the roots at intervals and giving rise to a new plant. When the plant is mature enough, The part of the stem joining the main plant withers away and then it later grows into a new plant. It grows on its own. Then by roots, there are some plants which have basically tuberous roots with adventitious buds. Those buds, when soaked in the soil, grows into a new plant. For example, there are various types of example of it like Biophyllum and Calice. Then, if I talk about leaves, there are some leaves which grows on the, so sorry, there are some plants which basically gets emerged by growing on the margins of the leaves. When the leaf falls on the moist soil, it grows into plantlets. The fleshy leaves supply food and water to the plantlet. When the plantlet is mature enough, it grows, withers away, and it grows into a new plant. This was all about naturally how vegetative propagation takes place. Now I will come about through artificial vegetative propagation. See, vegetative propagation can produce various types of plants. That is why at a maximum scale, that is why it is used in nurseries and gardens. The method of vegetative propagation, which is done by man and through artificial methods, not naturally, that is known as artificial vegetative propagation. Then there are various types of methods of artificial vegetative propagation like cutting, layering, grafting, and tissue culture. Cutting. A small stem, and you can say an auxiliary bud is cut up from the stem of the plant, which is soaked in the soil. The lower portion has roots and the upper has buds. The buds basically later again when it is soaked in the soil, it grows into a new plant. For example, your bougainvillea, sugarcane, pineapple, and rose. Layering. In layering, what happens? For example, a branch of the plant, a branch is cut off from the main plant and then it is soaked in the soil. The part which is covered under the soil, it develops roots, then it is cut off from the main plant. Then it grows into a new plant. Then grafting. What happens is grafting is that there are some process of artificial methods through which a human try to produce varieties, new varieties of plants. Grafting is also one of them a method. What happens in grafting is that, for example, a stem cutting called cycle with a rooted stem called stalk is taken. Both of them are combined by tying them. The stalk supplies some essential nutrients to the cycle, and this is known as grafting, through which new varieties of plants gets produced or new varieties are there in a plant. It is basically done in rose and mango. In rose plant, it is basically done to get new varieties and different colors of flowers in a single plant. Tissue culture. Tissue culture is basically done using laboratory facilities. It is also known as micropropagation. A small piece is cut from the growing tip of the plant. It is grown in a nutrient medium. Then it grows into an unorganized mass of cells known as callus. The callus grows in a nutrient of hormones to induce cell differentiation and formation of plantlets. These plantlets are soaked in the soil, which later grows into a new plant. Since this method can be used to produce varieties of ornamental plants, it basically some of its examples are like chrysanthemum, asparagus, and orchids. Now, some advantages of vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation is basically used in like which plants which do not produce seeds, for example, banana and grapes, sugarcane. It is basically now the plants which is produced through vegetative propagation bears the flowers more earlier than those plants which are produced through seed. The plants which are produced through vegetative propagation have the same parent features as that or have the parent plant. Then some disadvantages are also there of vegetative propagation, that the plants which are produced through vegetative propagation, since they are having the same parent features, if one plant will get infected, then others will also get infected. The new generations of plants which are grown through vegetative propagation, they lose vigor. Third thing, there are very chances of dispersal are very less because there is lot of overcrowding. This was all about what is vegetative propagation and about asexual reproduction. Now I will talk about to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is basically done to form seeds. Seeds are basically grown into a new plants under favorable conditions. Now the subheading is flowers. Now we will talk about flowers. Flowers are the organs of reproduction in seed-bearing plants known as angiosperms. A flower basically has seeds which later grows into a new plant under favorable conditions. Now see friends, a flower, though they are of different color, shape and size, yet most of them are having the same function. A flower has four whorls: calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium. All these four whorls, are arranged on a fleshy base known as thalamus or receptacle. The outer two whorls, which are the calyx and the corolla, they do not take part in reproduction. The inner two whorls, the androecium and the gynoecium, those basically takes part in reproduction. Corolla are basically your petals, calyx are your sepals. Androecium is the male reproductive cell, gynoecium is the female reproductive cell. Now, the flowers which comprise all these four whorls are known as complete flowers, which comprise both androecium and gynoecium. Those are basically known as bisexual hermaphrodite plants. For example, rose, hibiscus, and petunia. The flowers which will either have a male flower or a female flower are known as unisexual flowers. Now, what happens in unisexual flowers is some of it's like male flower is known as staminate and female is known as pistillate. It basically takes place in pineapple and maize. The flowers which are not having both androecium and gynoecium are called neutral flowers, for example, ray florets of sunflower. Now I'm going to talk about pollination. Pollination is basically occurs for the fusion of gametes and seeds to be formed. What happens in pollination is, for example, there's basically transfusion between pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. Pollination is basically of two types, natural and artificial. Now there are basically two subtypes of pollination. For example, your simple pollination and your cross pollination. What happens in simple pollination is that the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower but of the same plant. In cross pollination, what happens that the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of another plant but of the same species. Now see, this is simple pollination does not require any external agents, but cross pollination requires some external agents like wind, insect, water, and animals. Pollen grains which are transferred by wind is known as entomophily. Insect, sorry. Now see, how does this pollination occurs by insects? For example, an insect has visited a flower. The pollen grains from the anther stick to his body. When he will visit some different flower, those pollen grains will transfer to the stigma. This is how pollination by insects occurs. Basically, the flowers are brightly colored and often scented. For example, rose and marigold. They also have a sweet nectar, for example, night jasmine, and the stigma of these flowers are very sticky, flat, or though knob-like. Pollination by wind. Pollination by wind occurs that process known as anemophily. Now see, the pollen grains which are pollinated by wind are very much light and dry so that they can be easily carried by the wind. They are produced in a very large quantity so that each pollen grain can reach at least the stigma of a flower. Each pollen grain can reach at least the stigma of a flower. Then the style projects out and has a large feathery stigma so that the pollen grains can be easily received. The stigma is very much large and feathery. Now, if I talk about pollination by water, pollination by water is known as hydrophily. It basically takes place in aquatic plants only like Vallisneria and Hydrilla. In Vallisneria, what happens is that the male flower on maturity it gets detached and floats on the surface of water. Since the female flower is having a long stalk, it also floats on the surface of water and pollen grains are transferred. Now, if I talk about pollination by animals, animals like squirrels, birds, they also help in pollination, but they only visit those plants which are high and are very large, brightly colored flowers. For example, a silk cotton tree. Now I talk about artificial pollination. See, artificial pollination is basically done to produce a new variety of plant. First of all, what happens? Two different parts of a plant is taken with certain desired varieties. For example, high yielding and disease resistant. After the selection of these varieties, crop breeding is done. And through crop breeding, a new plant is produced. The new plant which is produced is known as a hybrid. The process is known as hybridization. It takes place in like wheat, maize, and rice. Now, let me tell you step by step how it occurs. For example, you have taken a androecium from a flower. The gynoecium is intact. Now, you will cover that gynoecium with a muslin bag to prevent the natural pollination. Since natural pollination is now, it will not occur, so when the pollen grains of that flower will become mature, you will entertain or you will deposit the pollen grains of a selected plant with the stigma of that flower. Now fusion will take, new seed will be produced. Through that new seed, a new variety of plant will be produced which will be of better quality and disease resistant. Now I will tell you about the main and most important components of flower, that is reproduction. See, when a pollen grain reaches the stigma, it swells and begins to grow through a pollen tube. The pollen tube travels down through the style to reach an ovule inside the ovary. Pollen tube is having nucleus which divides into two male nuclei. Each male nuclei travels down through the pollen tube to fuse with the female egg cell. Post fusion of gametes takes place, a zygote is formed. Zygote divides, embryo is formed. Embryo divides, seed is formed. Now, what is seed? Seed. After this fertilization, sepals, petals, stamen, stigma, style all wither away. There is an ovule inside the ovule with a fertilized egg called zygote. Then this ovule changes into a seed. So, what is a seed? A seed is a fertilized and mature ovule which later develops into a new plant under favorable conditions. Now, fact file if I talk about, so there are some false fruits known as apple and pear because their ovaries does not form the main fleshy central part. They are just a seed. You may have noticed an apple, the main central part is not fleshy, just the seed is there. So that is why they are known as false fruits. Now, if I talk about what is an ovary, so basically after fertilization, ovule changes into seed and ovary into fruit. Now there are walls of the ovary can be fleshy and dry. They are basically fleshy in potato, tomato, and cucumber, dry as in pea. It also protects the fruit from external climatic influences. Now see, embryo. When you have like for example, kidney pea on a gram, you must have seen it has a seed coat known as embryo. When the seed coat is withered away, you can see the embryo which has two fleshy cotyledons and an embryonal axis, right? First of all, the cotyledons are basically attached to the embryonal axis only, and embryonal axis has two systems. First is the root system, which is the known as the radicle, and the second one is a small leafy-like structure known as spirule, which forms the shoot system. So the process through which a dormant or a sleeping embryo becomes active, germinate into a seed, and develops into a new plant is known as what? Reproduction. Sorry, germination. Water, a suitable temperature, and oxygen are required for it. With this whole chapter is finished. Thank you. Have a nice day.